The National Military Museum stood proud under the morning sun, its walls holding centuries of human warfare history. James Miller walked slowly through the familiar halls, his old bones protesting each step. At 85, he still visited the museum 3 times a week, drawn to one exhibit in particular. Today was different. The halls buzzed with unusual activity as blue-skinned Alliance representatives toured the facility. Earth had joined the Galactic Alliance just 2 months ago, and these were the first military observers to visit the museum. James paused near his favorite exhibit, pretending to read the plaque he had memorized years ago. The M1A3 Abrams tank stood massive and proud behind the barrier, its desert camouflage still visible beneath the careful restoration. It was his tank, the very machine he had commanded during the resource wars of 2040. The Alliance group approached, their translator devices humming softly. The lead observer, tall with silvery skin, pointed at the tank. "This was a primary combat vehicle?" he asked, antenna twitching with what James recognized as amusement. "Yes, Ambassador," the museum guide explained. The Abrams served as the backbone of American ground forces for over 70 years. This particular unit saw action in the resource wars. The ambassador made a sound like tinkling glass, their version of laughter. How quaint. Chemical propellants and depleted uranium rounds. We abandoned such primitive methods centuries ago. Another observer, this one with scaled skin, tapped the armor with a clawed hand. Physical armor plating. Not even a basic energy shield. How did your species survive using such outdated technology? James gripped his cane tighter, knuckles turning white. These aliens hadn't seen what his tank could do. They hadn't been there during the Battle of Denver, when his crew had held the line against overwhelming odds. Fascinating waste of resources, the ambassador continued. The armor alone must weigh tons. Our modern hover tanks use minimal materials, relying on deflector fields and plasma containment. The old commander closed his eyes, memories washing over him. The thunder of the main gun, the smell of cordite, the way the whole tank shuddered when firing. The crew working in perfect harmony, loading, targeting, firing. They had been unstoppable. "Look at the targeting system," another alien observer pointed out. "Manual calibration with computer assistance. We've had full AI targeting for generations. This is more like a museum of primitive curiosities than a record of proper warfare." James couldn't stay quiet any longer. He stepped forward, standing as straight as his old back would allow. "Excuse me," he said, voice still carrying the command presence of his military years. "I commanded that tank." The aliens turned, clearly surprised that someone would interrupt their discussion. The ambassador's antenna pulled back, a sign of either respect or embarrassment. James couldn't tell. "With all due respect," James continued, "that primitive machine has something your modern tanks don't." He pointed at the Abrams with his cane. "Soul. Reliability. When your energy shields fail and your plasma containment fields collapse, a good old-fashioned tank like this keeps fighting." The scaled observer blinked multiple eyes. "The odds of our modern defenses failing are astronomical. Our technology is far superior." James smiled, remembering countless battles. "Maybe. But I've seen fancy weapons fail before. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways. That tank never let me down, not once." The ambassador gave what might have been a diplomatic nod. "Your perspective is interesting, former commander, but surely you understand that military technology has evolved far beyond simple kinetic weapons and metal armor." "Perhaps," James said, turning to leave. Under his breath, he added, "But I'd still bet on her in a real fight." As he walked away, James heard the aliens resume their discussion of Earth's primitive military history. Let them laugh, he thought. Some lessons could only be learned the hard way. Looking back one last time at his old tank, James smiled. Humanity had joined the stars carrying technologies the Alliance considered revolutionary. But he knew better than to forget the tried and true machines that had brought them this far. The Abrams sat silently in its display, a sleeping giant among relics. James had a feeling its story wasn't over just yet. 3 months after the Alliance delegation's visit to Earth's military museum, everything changed. The emergency alarms in the Alliance Central Command blared through the night, their piercing sound marking the beginning of what would become the greatest crisis in galactic history. Tom Miller sat in the Human Liaison office, watching the holographic displays with growing concern. As Earth's military advisor and the grandson of famous tank commander James Miller, he had earned his place among the Alliance's strategic planning team. Now he watched red warning markers spread across the star map like a virus. "Another border world has fallen," announced Admiral Rax, his silver skin dulled with exhaustion. "The Grey Legion's ships they just walked through our shields like they weren't even there." The room fell silent. The Grey Legion had appeared from unknown space 2 weeks ago, and nothing in the Alliance's arsenal seemed to work against them. Their strange ships absorbed or ignored energy weapons, and their own plasma cannons cut through Alliance shields like paper. "Sixth Fleet is gone," reported Captain White, Tom's human colleague. "They didn't even slow the Legion down. Whatever tech they're using, it's making our weapons useless." Tom studied the battle footage carefully. Something about the enemy's defenses looked familiar. "Admiral," he said, standing up, "can you show me how their shields interact with different weapons?" The Admiral waved a hand, and new footage appeared. Energy weapons splashed harmlessly against gray barriers. Plasma bolts were absorbed completely. But then Tom noticed something interesting. Space debris, simple rocks and metal, passed right through the shields and pinged off the hull. "They're shields," Tom muttered, an idea forming. "They're tuned to stop energy weapons. But what about physical projectiles?" Admiral Rax's antenna twitched in confusion. "Physical projectiles. We haven't used those in war for centuries. Too primitive, too." Tom's eyes lit up. Too primitive. That's it. He pulled out his comm device and called his grandfather. "Hey, Grandpa. Remember how those Alliance observers laughed at your old tank? Well, I have a crazy idea." 2 hours later, James Miller stood beside his grandson in front of the Alliance War Council. The old tank commander's eyes sparkled as Tom explained his theory. "The Grey Legion's shields are advanced." "Yes," Tom said, pointing to the battle footage. "But they're specialized. They stop energy and plasma perfectly because that's all they expect to face. But what if we hit them with something they're not prepared for?" "You want to use museum pieces against the most dangerous threat we've ever faced?" General Stone asked, his face stern but interested. James stepped forward, leaning on his cane. "That museum piece could put a depleted uranium round through 3 feet of armor at 2 miles. No energy shield, just raw kinetic force. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." The council chambers erupted in argument. Some called it desperation. Others called it insanity. But as more reports of defeats poured in, desperation started to look like wisdom. "We have nothing to lose," Admiral Rax finally declared. "How long would it take to get these tanks ready for combat?" Tom smiled. "The museum pieces are in working order. They were preserved perfectly. We just need ammunition and fuel. And I know some old Army mechanics who've been dying to work on real machines again." As the council approved the plan, James put his hand on his grandson's shoulder. "They laughed at human technology," the old man said quietly. "Maybe now they'll learn why we kept those tanks in working order all these years." That night, under cover of darkness, crews began moving the Abrams tanks from museums across Earth. Engineers and old veterans worked side by side, checking systems that hadn't been used in anger for decades. The Grey Legion had no idea that their greatest nightmare was about to roll out of humanity's museums, one depleted uranium round at a time. The old military hangar buzzed with activity as floodlights pierced the night. Mechanics and engineers swarmed around the massive form of the M1A3 Abrams tank, their tools clanking against its armor. The air smelled of oil, grease, and hope. Tom Miller stood beside his grandfather James, watching as the restoration team worked. The old tank commander's eyes never left his former machine as they carefully checked every system. "Main gun looking good," called out Master Mechanic Pete from the turret. He had come out of retirement the moment he heard about the project. "Breach is clean. Targeting system responds perfectly." These museum folks kept her in better shape than we did during active duty. James smiled. "They better have. I visited 3 times a week to make sure they did." The Alliance had given them 1 week to prove the tanks could work. Around the world, similar scenes played out as more museum pieces came back to life. This tank, James's old command, would be their proof of concept. "Sir," a young engineer rushed up, holding a tablet. "We've run the simulations. The depleted uranium rounds should pass right through the Grey Legion's shields. Their energy barriers don't even register solid objects under a certain velocity." Tom took the tablet, studying the data. "Their overconfidence is our advantage. They designed their defenses to stop what they thought were the only weapons worth using." A loud roar filled the hangar as the tank's turbine engine rumbled to life. The sound was deep and powerful, nothing like the high-pitched whine of modern hover tanks. James closed his eyes, letting the familiar vibration wash over him. "Listen to that," Pete shouted over the engine. 70 years old, and she still purrs like a kitten. Alliance observers stood at the back of the hangar, their expressions a mixture of doubt and growing interest. They watched as the crew ran through basic movements, the tracks clanking against the concrete floor. "Hydraulics at 100%, reported the engineering team. "Stabilization systems working perfectly. Main gun elevates and traverses smoothly. She's ready for a test fire." They moved the operation outside to the old tank range. The night air was cool as they set up targets at varying distances. Alliance sensors would measure everything about the test. "Loading first round," called the loader, sliding a depleted uranium shell into the breach. The sound of the breach closing echoed across the range. Tom stood with the Alliance observers, while James stayed near his old tank. The older Miller couldn't keep the proud smile off his face. "Target acquired," the gunner announced. 2,000 meters, standard hull target with Grey Legion shield specifications. Everyone held their breath. Modern sensors tracked the target, showing its energy shield glowing bright and strong. "Fire." The tank's main gun roared, the muzzle flash lighting up the night. Less than a second later, the target exploded. The Alliance sensors told the story. The round had passed straight through the shield as if it wasn't there. "Shield penetration 100%, reported the sensor operator, antenna twitching in excitement. "Target destroyed with single shot." More tests followed. They tried different shields, different angles, different ranges. Every time, the results were the same. The primitive tank rounds ignored the advanced shields completely. "Well," Admiral Rax said, looking at the smoking targets, "it seems we owe humanity's museums an apology. How soon can we have more tanks ready?" Tom checked his tablet. 20 units will be combat ready in 3 days. We're reactivating old ammunition plants now. The Grey Legion won't know what hit them." As the excitement built around them, James patted the tank's armor. "Welcome back, old friend," he whispered. "Looks like you've got one more war to win." The tank sat there, its engine idling with a deep rumble that seemed to promise revenge against those who had dismissed it as obsolete. Sometimes, the old ways really were the best ways. The old military hangar buzzed with activity as floodlights pierced the night. Mechanics and engineers swarmed around the massive form of the M1A3 Abrams tank, their tools clanking against its armor. The air smelled of oil, grease, and hope. Tom Miller stood beside his grandfather James, watching as the restoration team worked. The old tank commander's eyes never left his former machine as they carefully checked every system. "Main gun looking good," called out Master Mechanic Pete from the turret. He had come out of retirement the moment he heard about the project. "Breach is clean. Targeting system responds perfectly." These museum folks kept her in better shape than we did during active duty. James smiled. "They better have. I visited 3 times a week to make sure they did. The Alliance had given them 1 week to prove the tanks could work. Around the world, similar scenes played out as more museum pieces came back to life. This tank, James's old command, would be their proof of concept. "Sir," a young engineer rushed up, holding a tablet. "We've run the simulations. The depleted uranium rounds should pass right through the Grey Legion's shields. Their energy barriers don't even register solid objects under a certain velocity." Tom took the tablet, studying the data. "Their overconfidence is our advantage. They designed their defenses to stop what they thought were the only weapons worth using." A loud roar filled the hangar as the tank's turbine engine rumbled to life. The sound was deep and powerful, nothing like the high-pitched whine of modern hover tanks. James closed his eyes, letting the familiar vibration wash over him. "Listen to that," Pete shouted over the engine. 70 years old, and she still purrs like a kitten. Alliance observers stood at the back of the hangar, their expressions a mixture of doubt and growing interest. They watched as the crew ran through basic movements, the tracks clanking against the concrete floor. "Hydraulics at 100%, reported the engineering team. "Stabilization systems working perfectly. Main gun elevates and traverses smoothly. She's ready for a test fire." They'd moved the operation outside to the old tank range. The night air was cool as they set up targets at varying distances. Alliance sensors would measure everything about the test. "Loading first round," called the loader, sliding a depleted uranium shell into the breach. The sound of the breach closing echoed across the range. Tom stood with the Alliance observers, while James stayed near his old tank. The older Miller couldn't keep the proud smile off his face. "Target acquired," the gunner announced. 2,000 meters, standard hull target with Grey Legion shield specifications. Everyone held their breath. Modern sensors tracked the target, showing its energy shield glowing bright and strong. Fire. The tank's main gun roared, the muzzle flash lighting up the night. Less than a second later, the target exploded. The Alliance sensors told the story. The round had passed straight through the shield as if it wasn't there. "Shield penetration 100%, reported the sensor operator, antenna twitching in excitement. "Target destroyed with single shot." More tests followed. They tried different shields, different angles, different ranges. Every time, the results were the same. The primitive tank rounds ignored the advanced shields completely. "Well," Admiral Rack said, looking at the smoking targets, "it seems we owe humanity's museums an apology. How soon can we have more tanks ready?" Tom checked his tablet. 20 units will be combat ready in 3 days. We're reactivating old ammunition plants now. The Grey Legion won't know what hit them." As the excitement built around them, James patted the tank's armor. "Welcome back, old friend," he whispered. "Looks like you've got one more war to win." The tank sat there, its engine idling with a deep rumble that seemed to promise revenge against those who had dismissed it as obsolete. Sometimes, the old ways really were the best ways. 2 months after the Battle of New Eden, the Alliance war room looked very different. Gone were the holograms showing endless defeats. Instead, the walls displayed maps of recaptured territories and successful counterattacks. In the center of it all stood a hologram of an M1A3 Abrams tank, rotating slowly as alien officers studied its design. "The humans call it retrograde warfare," Admiral Rax explained to the gathered commanders. His silver skin now gleamed with renewed confidence, using weapons so old that they bypass modern defenses completely. Tom Miller stood beside a massive display table, pointing to various battle sites. His tank unit, now known as the Fossils, had grown from 6 tanks to 60. Their success had changed everything. "The Grey Legion never adapted their shields," Tom explained. "They couldn't. Their whole defense system is built around stopping energy weapons. They'd need to rebuild their entire fleet to stop simple metal rounds." A scaled commander raised his hand. "But what about their plasma weapons? Surely they can still." "That's the beauty of it. Tom interrupted, smiling. Our tank's armor is just thick metal and ceramics. Their plasma splashes off or gets absorbed. No complex shield generators to overload. No power systems to fail. Just good old-fashioned armor doing its job. The room's main screen showed footage from recent battles. Abraham's tanks rolled through alien cities, their tracks crushing through debris as Grey Legion forces retreated. Each shot from the human tanks meant another enemy vehicle destroyed. We've begun production of new ammunition, reported General Stone. The old factories are running again. And we've discovered something interesting. Many of our colony worlds have the materials to make these primitive weapons locally. No need for complex supply chains. Admiral Rax nodded. The Grey Legion's advance has been stopped. More than that, they're pulling back from their conquered territories. Their invincible reputation is broken. Tom clicked a button, showing more battle footage. This time, it wasn't just tanks. Old-style artillery pieces lobbed shells over enemy lines. Conventional aircraft dropped unguided bombs that ignored shield frequencies completely. Simple rockets carried basic warheads that tore through the most advanced defenses. Earth's museums have become our most valuable military assets, Tom said. Every obsolete weapon, every primitive design, is being studied and reproduced. The Grey Legion doesn't know how to fight a low-tech war. In orbit above various Alliance worlds, newly modified warships now carried massive railguns alongside their energy weapons. The simple metal slugs they fired ripped through enemy ships, whose shields were tuned to stop lasers and plasma. The Grey Legion still holds an advantage in speed and mobility, Tom admitted, but they can't hold ground against us anymore. Every time they face our tanks, they retreat. They've started calling us the Iron Demons in their communications. James Miller watched from the back of the room, leaning on his cane with pride. The Alliance officers who had once mocked his tank now took notes on its capabilities. Some even asked for his autograph after meetings. We're pushing them back on all fronts, General Stone announced. Their forces are retreating to their home systems. For the first time, we have them on the run. Tom zoomed in on a particular sector of space. We've located their main fleet base. My tanks are ready for a major offensive. With your permission, Admiral, we'd like to show them just how effective these museum pieces can be in a full assault. Admiral Rax's antenna twitched with satisfaction. Permission granted, Commander Miller. It's time to end this war the old-fashioned way. Throughout Alliance space, production lines hummed as they manufactured new versions of old weapons. Humanity's obsolete technology had changed the course of the war. Now it was time to win it completely. The Grey Legion's home system filled with Alliance ships. But these weren't the sleek energy weapon platforms of 6 months ago. These ships bristled with railguns, missile tubes, and huge cannons. Leading the ground assault force was Tom Miller's command ship, carrying his veteran tank unit, the Fossils. All ships in position, Admiral Rax announced over the fleet channel. The Grey Legion's home fleet is moving to intercept. Tom stood in his ship's observation deck, watching enemy vessels approach. Their shields glowed with confident energy, the same shields that had once seemed unbeatable. Now they were just pretty lights waiting to be pierced by simple metal rounds. Launch the first wave, ordered Admiral Rax. Show them what humanity's primitive weapons can do. Thousands of missiles streaked from Alliance ships. Not modern smart missiles with plasma warheads, but simple rockets carrying solid warheads. The Grey Legion's shields, designed to stop energy weapons, might as well have been paper. Multiple enemy capital ships destroyed, reported the tactical officer. Their shields are failing to stop our kinetic weapons. They're falling back to defensive positions around their homeworld. Tom turned to his tank crews, who waited eagerly by their machines. Mount up. We're going in hot. The landing ships descended through the atmosphere under cover of the space battle. Grey Legion air defenses fired plasma bolts that splashed harmlessly off their thick armor plating. No shields, just solid metal between them and the enemy. Ground forces, deploy, Tom ordered as their ships touched down. Landing ramps dropped, and 60 Abrams tanks rolled out onto alien soil. Their tracks dug into the strange purple dirt as they formed up for the assault. "Target their command center," Tom commanded from the lead tank. "All units, advance." The tanks rolled forward in formation, their engines roaring. Ahead, Grey Legion walkers and hover tanks moved to meet them. The enemy's weapons were still deadly, but their once invincible shields meant nothing against depleted uranium rounds. "Main gun, target that walker," Tom ordered his gunner. "Show them what Earth's museums sent them." The tank's main gun thundered. A depleted uranium round screamed across the battlefield, punching through the walkers' shields like they weren't there. The massive machine exploded, scattering pieces across its allies. "All tanks, open fire," Tom commanded. "Push forward." 60 main guns roared as one. Grey Legion vehicles exploded everywhere, their advanced technology useless against simple kinetic force. The enemy tried to fight back, but their plasma weapons weren't designed to penetrate old-fashioned armor. "They're pulling back to the city," reported Tank 4. "They're trying to use the buildings for cover." Tom smiled. "That won't save them. All units, switch to high-explosive rounds. Let's remind them why tanks ruled Earth's battlefields for over a century." The tanks advanced steadily, their guns blazing. Buildings crumbled as high-explosive rounds found their marks. Grey Legion forces retreated in disorder, facing weapons they couldn't defend against. "Enemy command center in sight," reported his gunner. "Range 2,000 meters. All tanks, concentrate fire," Tom ordered. "Let's end this war." 60 tanks fired at once. The Grey Legion's command center, with all its advanced shields and defenses, collapsed under the barrage of simple explosive shells. As the dust settled, enemy units began surrendering across the battlefield. "Alliance Command, this is Tank Actual," Tom reported. "Enemy command destroyed. The city is falling. Request permission to accept their surrender." Admiral Rax's voice came back clearly. "Permission granted, Commander Miller." "Well done. The Grey Legion's council is calling for peace talks. It seems they've learned not to underestimate primitive technology." Tom looked through his periscope at the alien city, where white flags now flew alongside broken shield generators. Humanity's old tanks had just won a galactic war. His grandfather had been right all along. Sometimes the old ways really were the best ways. 1 year after the Grey Legion's surrender, the National Military Museum had a new wing. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling on the centerpiece of the exhibition, the very same M1A3 Abrams tank that had started it all. Its battle-scarred armor told the story of a war that changed the galaxy's understanding of military technology. James Miller stood before the tank, now 90 years old, his grandson Tom by his side. The tank's armor showed marks from plasma hits and alien weapons, but it stood proud and tall, just as it had on the Grey Legion's homeworld. "Hard to believe they used to laugh at it," Tom said, adjusting the Medal of Valor on his uniform. "Now every Alliance world wants their own tank division." James smiled, remembering the day when alien observers had mocked his old command. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best solution. They just needed a reminder. Around them, alien visitors studied the tank with respectful silence. No one laughed anymore. Instead, they took notes and captured images, trying to understand how such an obsolete weapon had changed the course of galactic history. Admiral Rax appeared, his silver skin gleaming as he approached the Millers. "Commander, Colonel," he greeted them, using their new ranks. "The Alliance Council has approved the new Combined Arms Doctrine. Every fleet will now carry what you humans call conventional weapons alongside energy weapons." "Smart decision," Tom nodded. "Never know when you might need to punch through an energy shield the old-fashioned way." The Admiral's antenna twitched with amusement. Indeed, the Grey Legion's mistake was assuming that newer always meant better. They forgot that weapons are tools. Each has its purpose. They walked through the museum's new section, where displays showed how humanity's primitive weapons had turned the tide of war. Videos play showing tanks breaking through seemingly invincible defenses, simple rockets destroying ships that energy weapons couldn't scratch. The Grey Legion scientists finally admitted it. Admiral Rax continued. They spent so long perfecting their shields against energy weapons, they forgot about basic physics. A metal round moving at high speed doesn't care about your fancy energy barriers. A group of young Alliance cadets gathered around James, eager to hear stories from the veteran tank commander. Both human and alien students now train together, learning to combine old and new technologies effectively. Production has started on the new hybrid vehicles, Tom reported. Tanks with both traditional armor and energy shields. Ships carrying railguns next to their laser batteries. The best of both worlds. James reached out and touched his old tank's armor one last time. The metal felt cool and solid under his hand, just as it had decades ago. "You know what makes me proudest?" he asked. "What's that, Grandpa?" "We didn't win because we had better technology. We won because we remembered our history, because we preserved these machines instead of throwing them away, because we respected the old ways even as we reached for the stars." Tom nodded, understanding. Around them, the museum had become a place of pilgrimage for military officers from across the galaxy. They came to study what they once dismissed as primitive, learning lessons in humility and innovation. A new plaque hung beside the tank, written in both human and Alliance languages. "Here stands the defender of two worlds, Earth and New Eden. Once called obsolete, now remembered as the weapon that saved the galaxy. Let it remind us that progress means building upon our past, not discarding it. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." James and Tom stood together before the tank that had changed everything. Above them, in orbit, new ships carried old weapons into the stars. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Never underestimate humanity's ability to solve new problems with old solutions. The Abrams tank stood silent but proud, a bridge between Earth's past and humanity's future among the stars. No longer a museum piece, but a legend that would be remembered as long as tanks rolled and soldiers fought across the galaxy.